The art of environmental documentary filmmaking is changing because the times are changing and the amount of content that goes out changes by the second, literally by the second. We have gone from documentaries that take about 6 months to 6 years to make to going to mini documentaries or just pieces of content that are documentary style that are about 2 minutes long. And so we're going to talk about what that's going to be like, what that looks like, and how it's made in today's day of huge social media content creation, and the environmental movement on today's episode of the How to Protect the Ocean podcast. Let's start the show. Hey everybody, welcome back to another exciting episode of the How to Protect the Ocean podcast. I'm your host, Andrew Lewin, marine biologist and science communicator, here to tell you what's happening with the ocean, how you can speak up for the ocean, and what you can do to live for a better ocean by taking action. Now, the last few episodes that I've been doing has been focused on a lot of marine stuff, which is obviously it's about the oceans, but I've been focusing a lot of like methods of measuring seagrass. We've been talking about fisheries. We've been talking about sort of like how fisheries are sampled, how policies are made. We've been talking a lot about how seagrass is measured across the way to make sure they're standardized. Today's going to be a little different because we're going to be really talking about how to speak up for the ocean, how to speak up for climate change. Because today I have Maya Lilly on the podcast today. She is a climate storyteller, strategist, and media producer, best known for her work with the Years Project, a nonprofit media initiative focused on reshaping how climate change is communicated to the public. Maya's work centers around one core idea: people engage with climate action when the story connects to their everyday lives. So through the Years Project, she helps produce accessible, emotionally grounded content that highlights real people, practical solutions, and hopeful pathways forward. The one thing I loved about this episode, we talk about a different way of doing storytelling, even in documentary storytelling. Very parallel to how we have moved away or trying to move away from parachute science and getting into collaborative science or even supportive science for local communities. Maya talks about how she helps communities during the filmmaking process to enable them to take action, but also be able to film the process in the meantime and see people confronted with conflict, and then how do they get over that or how they deal with it in a very interesting situation or a very interesting way. And I just love what she's done. We had a very great conversation, longer than normal, but a wonderful conversation nonetheless, because I think I could have talked to her for about 3 hours and picked her brain. Selfishly for me as a communicator and a content creator, but also she's just so engaging and just such an amazing person. It's very easy to talk to her, as you'll see. So here is the interview with Maya Lilly talking about climate communication, how important it is in today's world, and how it's changing or how it has changed with the way content is being created. Enjoy, and I will talk to you after. Hey Maya, welcome to the How to Protect the Ocean podcast. Are you ready to talk about climate action and communication?
I am ready, Andrew.
All right. I'm super excited. This is a lot of fun because Maya, I don't know how, I just discovered you recently through a friend, Amy Bolduck, who you were on the podcast before, and it was amazing. I listened to it. I got to know you a little bit, and Amy's like, Andrew, you got to have her on the podcast. She is phenomenal. What she's doing is amazing for climate action, for just getting people aware about climate and climate science and what we need to do about it. But she also connects people to climate action, which I think is so important. So we're going to get into your story and what you do and how you do it, because I'm interested as a science communicator myself to be like, how do I connect better, or how do I just connect with people who may be outside of my audience that want to be aware, and I just don't know if I'm able to connect with them and how to do that. So I'm super excited for this episode. But before we get into everything like that, Maya, why don't you just let us know who you are and what you do?
I am Maya Lilly. That is my real name. And I am a film and TV producer that is on staff with the Years Project, we're the TV team that did a TV series called Years of Living Dangerously on Showtime and Nat Geo. It was basically the first and kind of only TV show about the climate crisis that took celebrities and made them like journalistic correspondents around the world. So like Harrison Ford went to Borneo to look at orangutans and palm oil depletion of the forests. Matt Damon looked at heat in Los Angeles, that kind of thing. And so with that team, we basically have a few different initiatives that we work on. But most of what I do is frontline BIPOC climate communication with original content for all different social media platforms.
So important. Let's start from the beginning before we touch on the Years Project and what you do now. How did you get involved in environmental communication, environmental documentary making, and just movies in general? Was that always a passion of yours when you were growing up?
I was kind of a weird kid. I had a very like kind of unicorn upbringing with a still married, happily married, interracial family that they really encouraged me to do critical thinking, and they encouraged me to live spherically, kind of like I was in the Renaissance or something. So they really encouraged me to to kind of have a wide knowledge base. And my mother was a teacher, and so I was always also in performing arts schools. And so my first love was the arts, but I was always kind of studying, like, I thought humans were very strange, as I was growing up. And as I think teenagers think their parents are strange, I kind of thought humans were strange. And it was almost like I had a 10,000 foot view, or like a wide lens on all the time. Whereas everybody else felt a little myopic, where people were kind of like, well, this is civilization. This is how it's set up. And I was kind of the kid that was like, well, but why did we choose concrete? Why did we choose right angles? Why do we live in these buildings like this? Like, so I just kind of had one of those questioning minds. And then when I was 15, I discovered that we were depleting the Amazon to make room for cattle for hamburgers. And I was like, hold the phone, say what now? Like, and this was before Google. So I had to kind of like go to the library and research it, or talk to people that were experts in the field. And I was like, wait, that is not a good idea. So I shunned, animal agriculture in general, and I started being kind of like an animal rights activist. And that didn't work. That basically alienated everybody I knew.
So when you did that, when you became an advocate, like, tell me a little bit about that, because it's interesting, because I think a lot of people turn towards that or start to speak up for that. That alienation happens because you're so passionate about it,
totally. Right? Yeah, and I even had a brief job as a spokesperson for PETA. So I would go on camera and do sound bites for, like for animal rights, long time ago. But I think, if you're an animal lover like I am, or like any of the documentarians who do ocean documentaries, there's an animal focus because non-human species are interesting. Like, they have compassion, they have, families, they have thought processes. And so I think it's easier to talk about an animal than it is to maybe talk about a redwood, where you're not exactly sure what kind of language they have, even though we know they do, right?
Exactly.
And so for me, it was more about the system of humans having the right to just take another species en masse and do whatever we wanted with them. That was more the issue for me. And then how that tugged on all these other things, like taking the Amazon away from indigenous cultures, and the, it being removed as the lungs of the earth, like just, field by hectare. It just felt like, I don't know if we should be doing that. So by the time I got off to college, I went to a theater conservatory. I was really like, I don't think humans know what they're doing, which was
just
upsetting.
In the environment, or everywhere? Like everything.
Mostly in the environment. But yeah, I mean, you could argue everywhere. I mean, we had an ocean pollution problem. We had a deforestation problem. We had a GMO problem. People were fighting in the 90s. They were fighting for organics and organic labeling. We had the WTO protests. So it was a really ripe time to be like a budding environmentalist. Right. Again, there was no Google, so no Whole Foods. So I was like, I had to be scrappy about it, to be honest. I had to like kind of figure it out. And my parents my dad's Jamaican, so it's all like curried goat, curried chicken.
Yes.
Stew peas. And they were just bewildered, but supportive, because again, like, live spherically, right? So when I was at Juilliard and I was training in Shakespeare, Chekhov, Strindberg, all of these like very, very beautiful but anthropocentric authors that is all about the human condition, it felt even more myopic I was there. I'm like wearing my glasses. I was there and I was like, why, I was learning about climate change and I was like, if we are making the planet uninhabitable, yeah, Romeo and Juliet's great, but who cares? So I
Yeah.
actually did a very hard thing. I decided to leave. I
Wow.
decided to leave my very hard to get into conservatory education to go do an
Yeah.
environmental studies degree, much to the chagrin of my parents and to
I
my
was just gonna
teachers.
ask. I was like, how did your parents feel about that? Because you're at an age where you're making your own decisions. You're living a little bit more independently, and here you are making a very very big decision on leaving because of this advocacy thing that's pulling you away. Why learn about theater and all the, even though it's really important and it was important to you, this
Yeah.
was more important to you at this fact. What was their response to it? I know they're supportive, but that's got to be they must have wanted to have a discussion. Let's just
Oh
say.
yeah, there were a few sit downs. I remember
Right.
a few like very convincing because I was also on a full scholarship, a
Oh
diversity
God.
scholarship. So it
Yeah.
was like
Yeah.
they were really like, "What are we doing?" But I think what they taught me was they trust my instincts, and
Hmm.
I always was like a really kind of old soul kind of kid. And so I think that won out and they
Yeah.
trusted that I was lit from within about something. I was just kind of at a place beyond which society had reached,
Hmm.
and it felt like I was like a Cassandra that knew that Troy was about to burn and nobody would listen to me.
Hmm.
It was
Hmm.
very, very isolating. So much so that when in 2019, when I started working for the Years Project, and one of my first shoots was doing the youth climate strikes, and
Yeah.
Greta Thunberg was sailing to New York, and I got
Hmm.
to film with Greta and like all the kids. I actually wept because I was like, this is the community I wanted in the 90s.
Hmm.
This is the group of people that I wished I had gone to school with who would have understood me. So my parents I felt like they did an okay job about understanding it because I think they trusted that I was on
Yeah.
a journey,
Right.
you know?
But like all parents, they want you to be financially stable or go into something where you're financially stable. Like I'm a parent
Yeah.
of a girl who's in a young woman, I should say, 18-year-old who's in university right now, and then my other daughter's 16. Like the big thing as a parent, as a marine biologist who knows like marine biology is not going to pay like a lot of the bills that you have, but it's a passion. You also
Yeah.
want your kids to be financially stable. Do whatever you want, but as long as you can pay your bills, we're happy. You know what I mean? Like I think that's
Yeah.
a big
Totally.
thing.
And especially as like the kid of immigrants, like
Yes,
my father joined the US Army to get his
right,
citizenship and he served this country. And I
awesome.
think
Thank you
like
for
when you're the
service.
kid of an immigrant, um, I always joke like immigrants' kids don't go skiing or skydiving, like because you don't want to break anything. Like
No,
you're
yeah,
like, be happy you're here. Like
yes,
you're good.
yes,
Like don't break anything. So so I think I had like an extra like caution around making drastic decisions, but
yeah.
all of that to say, acting is not necessary. There are a lot of out of
No,
work actors. So I think maybe my
that's true too.
environmental studies degree might have been a step up.
Well, it's funny you say that because my wife has a Chinese background. Her parents were from, one of them was from Taiwan, one of them was from Hong Kong, and they both came over, met here, and had their life here. But they have a very similar way of thinking, in terms of like job stability and don't do anything too drastic, just stay the course. And of course, especially with like Chinese culture and Taiwanese culture, it's very much the next generation, and you want to make
Right.
sure that everybody's good. But yeah, I
Right.
totally see it.
Yeah.
It's like just stay the course. Do something that's you'll get paid for, and you can pay your bills, and you can enjoy your life and have a family, and be healthy. That's
Yeah.
the basics. Like just get the basics there.
Yeah.
It's a
Exactly.
lot of fun. Yeah, very interesting. So you're getting into this advocacy part. And you're having trouble finding that community because it's the 90s, and let's be honest, climate change was being discussed in my, like, I went to university in the late 90s. It was being discussed in sort of academic circles,
Hmm.
not necessarily on the news, and if it was immediately shot down because climate denial was pretty much at its peak by then, and nobody was believing anybody. I had conversations with family and friends, and it was just like, no, the economy is more important. This not going to affect anything. And meanwhile, like, my professors are like, in 20 years, we're in trouble. Like, we need to go back. You know what I mean? And so you're trying to find this community, but you're having the struggle to find it. So your next step after Juilliard, where do you go? What do you do?
So to your point about, trying to, the climate denial, I urge everybody to watch The White House Effect, which I think is on Netflix right now, but it basically uses archival footage and shows the George H.W. Bush administration, just from archival, go from, we want to fight the greenhouse effect with the White House effect, and how they were fully on board as a Republican Party, and then the switch that happened. And it's absolutely riveting. Highly, highly recommend. And I hope it gets an Oscar nom. I should check.
It just came out, right? Like, not long ago.
Yeah.
Correct? Like this within the last year. Yeah. Yeah.
So, when I went and did my environmental studies degree, I didn't quite know what the focus was that I was going to be. So I took an oceanography class. I was taking astronomy. I was taking environmental ethics and philosophy. And I was really into ecofeminism and deep ecology, which I still kind of nerd out about. And like, why didn't that happen and change the world? But I realized pretty quickly that I still was a storyteller. Like, I still had this whole set of skills that I'd grown up with, where I was deeply in love with stories. So I was looking at, how do I marry these two kind of disparate fields? And I mistakenly thought, when I got my undergraduate degree in environmental studies, I mistakenly thought that I would just go out and like get a job with, like, I don't know, Greenpeace or 350.org as their like documentarian,
Gotcha. Yeah.
And I quickly realized that those roles actually don't really exist.
I was about to say, did they have a documentarian at the time?
No, a lot of environmental orgs, nonprofits, NGOs, they have a comms team.
Yes.
But usually that's like writing press releases. That's like helping with the website. They are not doing storytelling at a high level. And even now, it's still sometimes a struggle to convince orgs that we work with of the need for it, which is bewildering to me, Andrew, because stories change culture. Like, it is literally the thing that connects the heart to the mind.
Yeah.
Well,
you are preaching to the choir here, because I've been trying to convince organizations to do podcasts just from if you have science that you're taking complex information, just like documentaries, and you are trying to explain it, you need the time to explain it properly. And podcasts, no matter what people say, there's at least 20 to 30 minutes that people are listening to this episode. And if you can say that within there, it's great. And compared to a very difficult short form video, which people are doing in a really great way these days, it's a very difficult thing to get some of those points across unless it's a series of videos. But sorry to go to your point, but you're preaching to the choir here.
God bless the climate scientists who were speaking out before the world and amidst like massive greenwashing from the fossil fuel industry. God bless them. Yeah. But I will say that I don't know if scientists were the best people to tell this story. No. So
agreed.
And I love some scientists, and I love some science. So it hurts me to say that, but it's like telling people facts and even just looking at like the 1.5 degrees Celsius mark. Yeah. Most people are thinking like 82 degrees, 84 degrees. So what? I'm going to go garden in my outside. It's hot.
They don't get it.
And they don't get it.
Yeah.
I just had a conversation with Luis Cehoyos, who is the documentarian that did The Cove. Okay. And we were talking about 1.5, and he was like, forget 1.5. Nobody understands that shit.
It's true. It's true. Same thing with sea level rise. If it rises like a centimeter or 2 centimeters, like, who cares? That doesn't make a difference. Like, you don't understand how much, but you say centimeters, people are like, this much? No, that's not gonna matter. You're completely right there. Yeah.
So I was like, how can we marry these two if none of the climate and environmental orgs that I thought I was going to get a job in have a job or see the value of it?
Yeah.
So I basically packed my stuff and went straight to LA. And I was like, where's the megaphone in the world? Hollywood. Let me just go and again be scrappy and see who I can meet and what I can do and try to. And I didn't know what form it would take. I saw maybe like a writer's room position. I kind of thought about producing, but hadn't really done it,
Mm-hmm.
And so I just kind of took a leap of faith. And then Hollywood is it's a very weird place.
We've
Um,
heard. We've heard.
there is a lot of social ladder climbing. And
Gotcha.
so if you're me, like imagine like an undercover environmental scout who is like, okay, how can I hack the narrative of what we're talking about so that we understand we're about to like bite it as a species and we
Right.
can infiltrate and put these topics. And people were just like, we need more tits and ass,
Mm-hmm.
like
Mm-hmm.
what's her rating on IMDb? We need her. Like it was just
Yeah.
bizarre. And I have pitched projects in pretty much every room in Hollywood. Like you name it, the streamer, I've been in the room. So
Right.
I've heard like the craziest comments. Like I had one producer who did a bunch of films. I won't mention what they are. He asked me, "So what's the big deal about like he had no climate knowledge
Right.
at all. Like
Yeah.
didn't even know that the earth was warming because of
Yeah.
greenhouse gases. So I had to do like a mini 101 session. I mean,
That's how I started
luckily
this
enough there
podcast. I started this
yeah.
podcast. Somebody asked me a question, a family member, and I was like, "How do you not know this? Like, I don't understand how you don't. How do you know it?" Yeah.
Well, because, and I'm trying to reframe this when I talk about this. It's not just that, scientists maybe weren't the best deliverers of the message. It's that there was a consistent, um, god awful denial of the facts
Mm-hmm.
by the fossil fuel industry, where they were
Mm-hmm.
taking out op-eds.
Mm-hmm.
They were using a very big PR and advertising machine with their billions of dollars that they had made on a product that their own scientists had proved was, causing like the most crazy ramifications to our earth.
Yeah.
So, one of my favorite little stories that I don't know if I told Amy this on Grounded in Maine podcast, but one of my favorite stories that I was just thinking about is there was a little 12-year-old girl who won her science fair in 1981, and she was in New Jersey.
Okay.
And what she did for the science fair, she took two little Washington monuments, like little miniatures. She put thermostats on them. She put them in two glass bowls, and then one she left open uncovered, and the other she put a plastic wrap over.
Okay.
And she put a heat lamp on both of them. And sure enough, the Washington Monument thermostat with the plastic wrap over it was a higher temperature than the uncovered one. And in 1981, this little 12-year-old just proved the greenhouse gas effect. But
Yeah.
what's interesting about this story is how did she know about the greenhouse gas effect in 1980 flippin' one?
Mm-hmm.
It's because her father was a man named Henry Shaw, and he was the scientist for ExxonMobil.
Yeah.
And all of the fossil fuel companies knew since the 1950s. They knew since the 1950s. And the problem with that, Andrew, that makes me so furious, is we lost about 60 years of action
Yeah.
where
Because they
we
got
could
ahead
have
of it.
been figured, they got ahead of it. They did different tactics. It wasn't all
Oh yeah.
denial. Like first
Yeah.
they were like, we want to help with the pollution that our products are causing. Then they shifted to, oh no, it's complete bullshit. The science isn't in. It's
Mm-hmm.
it's not it's not not all the scientists are aligned, right? And now in like the 2000s and whatnot, they shifted to, oh well, we are actually going to put money into renewables and we're going to
Yeah.
help support
Yeah.
shifting, which ends up being greenwash because it's like 1% of their budget or
Yeah.
whatever.
Yeah. Well, I even
Yeah.
find too, I've seen some talk and publications from them, and when I mean publications, just like white papers and action and media of like, oh yeah, well climate change is here, but there's not much you can do about it, so you might as well just go with it. And you're just like, what? Like you went from denial to, yeah, let's just go with it. Like it's not happening, it's not happening. No, it's happening. We kind of lied. We apologize for that. We had this whole strategy to make sure you didn't do anything about it, and now we're just
Right.
like, nah, it's too late. There's nothing you can do. Like we're just gonna have to ride this out. You're
But
just
also,
like,
but
what?
if they really believed that, they wouldn't be infiltrating the UNFCCC COP climate talks the way that they are.
Oh
They're
yeah,
infiltrating them to make sure it's like the tobacco industry being at the bedside of the lung cancer patient and advising the doctor on
Yeah.
what they're going to do for their rollout,
Yeah.
their
Well,
medication
and you
plan.
see it even, you talk about plastic pollution, obviously it's a petroleum product. So you see lobbyists there at the UN treaty for the UN plastic treaty negotiations, and they're kiboshing those all the time. And you just sit there and you're just like, how are they in everything? They're everywhere because they got all this money, where their lobbyists were outnumbering the scientists and the policymakers that were at those meetings. And same obviously with COP, as you mentioned, like the oil and gas and the climate change agreement. They're just everywhere. And they're very interesting in the way, they're very strategic in the way they go. Sometimes you don't even realize it. They had at one of the COPs for the UN treaty, the plastic treaty in Ottawa, somebody from Oceania was on the podcast, Anthony Morente, and he was telling me that they had people from other countries come in, and they paid them to come in and stand beside signs saying, no, actually, we're okay with everything that's happening. Like, we need plastic. We need all this. And then so they actually went up and asked them, the people, they're like, hey, do you really believe this? Like, no, actually, we got paid to come to Canada. We got paid to do this. We're just doing this for the money. We don't even know what we're talking. Like, they didn't understand like what it was for.
Yeah.
They were just taking advantage. Unfortunately, they were taken advantage of. And this is not to speak that they weren't intelligent or anything like that. They were just offered some money, offered an opportunity, and they went. And I don't know any of the backgrounds of the people, but you're just kind of sitting there, you're like, these people are sneaky, in terms of what they're doing. Like, they are pulling like everything, every stop.
This is like kind of parallel to fossil fuels, but I've done stories about the utilities.
Yeah.
And I did a story with journalists in Florida, journalists from a outfit called Floodlight, which looks at the people that are stopping climate progress. Really great news outlet. And they were telling the story about Florida Power and Light, and how Florida Power and Light ran a ghost candidate to pull votes away from the liberal candidate who wanted solar, who was promoting solar in the Sunshine State. And so that candidate lost because they had a ghost candidate, and they had hired a PR firm called Matrix, who was literally having journalists like followed, and like their photos. So all this treasure trove of information came out in the investigation, and you could see the photos of the journalist like walking his dog. And the journalists were like, what are they going to do? Are they going to take us out like hitmen? So for me, utilities are no different than fossil fuels, So wherever you're getting your energy from, it's the same kind of battle.
It's the same kind of battle. Yeah. They want position, right? That's all they want, government favor, and they want position, and they're willing to do anything, and they use the law to do it. I mean, we've seen it with Monsanto in terms of their GMO seeds, and how they were basically blackmailing farmers who didn't want their seeds, but because wind brought it onto their system, like onto their farm, they're like, hey, by the way, you owe us money for taking our seeds. Unbelievable how they got, and then they ended up getting human rights for their corporation, which is crazy. I mean, but here's the thing with all of this type of misinformation systems that you're battling, and especially from the start of your filmmaking career, trying to figure out what to do. And this might be a bigger question than I'm not sure if like we have the time to answer, but how has your process skills and abilities evolved over this time, from like going back when you were in high school, understanding learning everything that's happening, getting educated through university, getting your degree, doing the storytelling, going to Hollywood, and like to now where you're working with the Years Project. How has that storytelling evolved from like when you first started compared to now?
I mean, this is an answer I could answer many different ways, but I think the hitting the nail on the head would be, I think when I first went to Hollywood, it was kind of the same thing that I did when I was an animal rights activist, which is if I just tell people, they'll change. So I was appealing to the ethics and morality of the people in the room. Like, we have this giant problem, the biggest problem of all time, which is a livable, habitable planet. It's going to be taken out by rising temperatures. And we might have all of the ice melting, and then creating at least 200 feet of sea level rise if that happens, And Hollywood is a business. Hollywood is a business. And what that means is the biggest thing I was confronted with was people don't want to tell people what to do because then they think they won't watch. Who wants to
Right.
watch something where they're being told what to do, hit on the head? This is the entertainment industry. And also, quietly, they do have some involvement in taking money from fossil fuels, and there's
Mm-hmm.
product placement of fossil fuels.
Mm-hmm.
So what saved me in starting to work at a higher level was, but one of the tenets of good storytelling is somebody confronting a problem and having to overcome it. That is what a good story is in the Western tradition,
100%.
the hero's journey being the classic version, but there are different ways of doing it.
Mm-hmm.
And so people want to watch and want to listen to somebody confronting a problem. And Hollywood is not opposed to that. What they were opposed to is doing it for a cause, without like any due reason. So what I quickly discovered was, I am an activist. I come from an activist background, and I know how to work with organizers, and they are doing some serious conflict shit. Like they are shutting down the MTA on game day for Black Lives Matter. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
And getting arrested en masse. They're shutting down like the streets of LA by UCLA to protest the prison incarceration system with undocumented immigrants. Like they're doing some high level, conflict. That is something that is good storytelling.
Yeah.
We want to watch people with urgency and high stakes and emotional vulnerability that have to do something. And then that's how we connect the heart with the facts. That's how we grab people in the audience, no matter who they are in the audience, even though you can fine tune to specific audiences.
Right.
I think that's the biggest thing I learned in my time. Because, when I first moved to LA, like one of the first projects I worked on was the US release of The Secret, which was the doc about like manifesting what you want, And so the whole community I was around, they were very big on like manifestation. It was very kind of spiritual cinema circles, And I was like the squeaky wheel. I was like, but what's like, I want to see a character that doesn't believe in it.
Exactly. And then sees.
And then, and then gets something manifested and then has to like overcome it, because I think that's good storytelling is like, what is the problem? What do we do about it?
Agreed. And I think what I like to see too from a story is the outcome, but almost being like a positive outcome, which is very difficult in the environmental world to come out with a positive outcome. Maybe if you can say like a fictional story where the outcome comes a little better, but like in the reality world, when I first started communicating, before I did the podcast, I started doing YouTube videos, and it was very interesting. I did CrossFit back then, and it's a very community based. Some people say it's a bit of a cult, but it's very community based, right? And we were at dinner and we were talking, and the owner of the gym was like, "Andrew, I watched some of your videos; they were really great, but I had to stop watching after a while." I'm like, "Oh, I'm curious. Like, no judgment. Like, why did you stop watching?" It's like it was very doom and gloom. Like everything you talked about was making me depressed, and I was like, "Oh, interesting." I'm like, obviously that's not what I wanted to do. But I went back and looked at the videos, and I'm like, I'm talking a lot about the problems facing the ocean. Right. But I wasn't necessarily doing interviews or doing some solo episodes where I was talking about some of the solutions that we found, or in practice, some of those solutions being put into practice in local communities and things like that. And so I did change, in looking at like, let's start, like, I'm not going to be able to say it every time, but I am going to be able to say it a lot of the times and have the people on who are doing some great things and working with communities and trying to get, better fisheries, better, understand climate change and how it's being affected, and sharing data and all this kind of stuff. And trying to introduce people to that and the people working in that. And I felt like it got a lot better received, not from that person, because I never asked her again after that, but I was like, oh, okay. So there are like, people don't want always the doom and gloom, but I see what you mean by like having a problem come to them, or being confronted with the problem and then having to overcome it, and what happens is sometimes it's good and sometimes it's not so good, right? With overcoming that problem.
And it can still be a hero's journey. It's never, the story arc that humans love story arcs. And
right.
The story arc is never just, it's all bad orcs, ring of fire, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
There are good points in the Shire and there are sad points. I don't know why I keep doing Lord of the Rings. but like it's a journey, and sometimes you have to have the offset. You have to have the
Hmm.
comparison to make the bad feel really bad.
Right.
You know, like I
Yeah.
just saw that movie, The Drop, which is about this single mom who finally gets a babysitter and goes out with the guy from 1923, the actor who's really hot right now.
Yes.
And they're
Yes.
on like a single date, and it's going really well. And then she's in some blackmail scheme where somebody starts texting her and they threaten to kill her date if she doesn't follow, and then they're going to kill her kid. And it's a cute little movie that's very unexpected. But if we didn't have that contrast of like,
Yeah.
oh my God, she's going out with the guy from 1923. He's so hot. Oh my goodness. And they're
Yeah.
at this
Yeah.
beautiful restaurant. None of that would matter.
Right. Yeah. 100%. Yeah. Yeah. No, for sure. For sure. But that's really interesting. Now, with the Years Project, this is a very interesting. As you mentioned before, it was there were a lot of celebrities it was almost celebrity driven, and very like celebrities that have been traditionally very conscious in environmental and social issues in the past, right? You mentioned Matt Damon, you mentioned Harrison Ford, but also people who are iconic in ways, been in movies and people want to hear them, and they're very like, I think Matt Damon has probably the more, not necessarily controversial, but he's lovable but also very passionate about what he feels when he feels. You've seen him do a lot of different things for teachers and all that kind of stuff in the past. It's really interesting to have that water, and of course now you had that moment where that series that came out, huge viewership, on great channels. How do you continue the momentum afterwards? They move on to different projects, and the series eventually ended, and now you're moving on with different types of content. So is that when you came on, or you came on during the episodes and then stayed on after, right?
I came on right after. I
Okay.
really wanted to work with them on the series, but the whole team was based in New York and I was in LA. So a lot of their
Gotcha.
producers were New York based. Um, but so the celebrity idea is one that's used in Hollywood a lot, and it's just for a
Hmm.
simple reason. You'll have like, why can't I think of a you'll have Giselle Bundchen in a
Hmm.
chair being the narrator for something, and might have other characters. They're
Hmm.
actually living the thing, but she'll like narrate certain facts, and it's just to get people to watch something.
Yes.
Like
Yep.
celebrities pull attention. As much
100%.
as I hate that fact, models,
Yeah, they
everybody,
do.
they just pull attention.
Yep.
We realized that two things: the climate crisis is going at such a frenetic, urgent pace
Hmm.
that even unscripted TV series take too long to produce. Don't even get me started on documentaries. And
Yes.
I was
Agree.
the producer for a documentarian named Lauren Greenfield for many years.
Hmm.
She did Queen of Versailles, about this very rich family that loses everything
Right.
um, in the housing crash. We did Generation Wealth together, which was looking
Hmm.
at how wealth has shifted our moral compass around the world. And I mean, we're talking 3 years, 4 years, 6 years to make a doc. A famous documentarian that I was just talking to has a doc on plastics in the body coming out. It took him
I don't know if I
six
want to
years
watch
to make.
that, but that's,
Oh
yeah.
yeah, and he
Yeah.
connects it to infertility. He said it was taking him 6 years, and I almost wanted to beg him, can we please go faster?
Hmm.
Can we please go faster? Because so that realization, that we don't have. I mean, if we're going to hit the 2030 mark, which we already blew past last year just for 1 year of the 1.5 degrees, like
Right.
we don't have that kind of time,
True.
And then also the other thing documentarians will do is they do like a year of development where they'll fly in and they're kind of trying to find characters, but they're not connecting to the climate campaigns and groups on the ground who already know the lay of the land, who've already built relationships, who've already like worked on this. And so it's like people keep starting from scratch rather
Yeah.
than let's connect this to a campaign that groups know, people know what they need locally. Like when I went to Cancer Alley for the first time in
Mm.
Louisiana, I mistakenly asked Sharon Levine, the Goldman Prize winner, I was like, why don't you leave?
Yeah.
Now that she's
Yeah.
like a friend and grandmother, I'm like, oh God, I wince when I think about that because
Right.
her whole thing is, why should I leave?
Hmm.
They need to leave.
Yeah.
I've been here for my family's been here for generations, you know? And rightfully so. Locals know what they need. And so documentarians, and even news, the whole fly in, fly out, extractive, do like all this new research and not have any idea of who you're filming. We're really hacking that algorithm. Like we aren't doing that anymore. So
Right.
we shifted our focus to, if everybody's getting their news from social media, let's flood the zone on social platforms. We have just as many viewers as we did for the show, which is crazy.
Yeah. Yeah, I
We
know,
get like
right?
millions of views. Yeah, and we have an influencer network of high level celebs that push out our work that we call the network.
Mm-hmm.
It's 750 million, like
Yeah.
all of their followers, which is
Unreal.
a crazy amount of people. So the time it takes, we're trying to shorten that so that we can just
Mm-hmm.
get this content to the groups faster. I'm focusing more on like BIPOC and frontline storytelling that we can like win the campaigns for the groups. So basically like stacking the impact producing that sometimes a production company will do sometimes at the end of the shoot.
Right.
Like participant was
Yep.
good at having an impact producing arm, right?
Mm-hmm.
Uh, like Waiting for Superman, the film
Yes.
about teachers in schools, they partnered with schools around the country to get that doc in the schools so kids could watch it, right? And
Right.
teachers could watch it. So that's an
Yeah.
example of impact producing.
Gotcha.
What we're doing is when we go in for the story, we're looking for a good story. So it's all the good principles, but it's also, what do you guys need? What will
Mm.
help you in this moment? I'll tell you another story, Andrew. So when officials decided to blow up vinyl chloride over the town of East Palestine, Ohio, and nobody will admit who gave the order, and you saw that mushroom cloud go up after the train derailed,
Yes.
we were some of the first people on the ground there I had my DP who had done the circus for Showtime and who is so fast and like psychically connected to me. We went in and I said to the community, I was like, what do you need? What do you want this story to be? They said,
Mm.
we want investigative scientists testing our water because they
Yep.
keep saying the plume went one way and we know that it went the other way. We want Governor Mike DeWine to get us emergency funds because he didn't declare an emergency for a year,
Took a
even
while.
though people were breaking out in rashes and all sorts of crazy,
Yeah.
going to the hospital with breathing problems. And then they also said, we want vinyl chloride banned. We want it put on the list of banned chemicals. So with those instructions, I told a good story, found all the great emotionally vulnerable characters, even had some kids in there, had followed some action. So we like followed the activists going to disrupt the Capitol to say like, our children are getting sick, you need to do
Yeah.
something. So and we got kicked out by the police. And then we partnered with Beyond Plastics and then basically used that, and we targeted EPA regional and federal officials with the doc. And we said, here it is. This is what's actually happening. Maybe the news didn't show you that their water has all these chemicals in it. Here you go. What are you going
So
to do with
you
it?
to prepare for the story, to prepare for the doc, you guys had water tested and everything
While we
like
were
that.
filming the doc.
So you didn't wait for government testing to happen. You guys did it as a private sort of entity to be like, okay, what you guys wanted to test the water? Give us samples of your water. We'll get it from a bunch of different people. We'll test it. We'll give you the results as well before the doc goes, so they have what they need, and then
Yeah.
you're able to do it. That's really interesting. Very, very
Luckily,
interesting.
like universities were frothing at the bit to get down
Of
on the ground
course.
there. So it was like there was no shortage of
Yeah. So
investigative
you had the
scientists who
people to
wanted to help.
do it. Yeah.
Yeah. So
Awesome.
yeah, and then because of our targeting of the EPA officials, vinyl chloride was put on the list of chemicals to consider banning. It's one of my finest moments as a producer because and who knows, I actually haven't checked. I haven't had the heart to check since the current administration of what's happened with that. But we succeeded in changing minds because they saw that doc, and it was what storytelling, in our opinion, should be
Yeah.
for. And last thing I'll say about like this and how we do it differently is Hollywood locks up the content. If you wanted to use The Cove, which won the Oscar about the Japanese dolphin killing, if you wanted to use that in your community, good luck. Good luck getting the footage. Good luck not getting sued if you want to use it. Good luck if you want to use the footage for fundraising. I'm just
You'd
using
have
that
to
as an
pay.
example. Yeah. Yeah. So we are also trying to get fully funded so we can gift this to climate groups to use.
right? Because everybody needs content. That's the biggest thing, right?
Everybody
Everybody
needs
needs
content.
story. Yeah, yeah.
And
Mm.
good story, like you with your nice microphone, not like, not like a shotgun mic, but like an actual sound
Yeah.
mixer on set with you, that's getting the good stuff.
It's so interesting because in my evolution of through the podcast is you connect with so many people. I interview a lot of people over my time. We were talking before. I've done over 1,800 episodes. Many of those have been interviews, and so I have a pretty big network of people. And one of the things we've been working with, especially over the past year, is I've been part of a science communication sort of advocacy group, right? Where we are online and we're like, okay, we need content creators to talk about this. Who's ready to do this? And people will put out videos, and we kind of like, so it's kind of like a bit of a network that we have that's controlled
Ooh, I
by,
like that.
not controlled, but that's kind of led by Chris Corbero. And like, it's amazing. It's a lot of fun. We've been able to do a lot of things off of it. We're always in the know. We're sending each other information that we find out. And so like one of the things that I've wanted to do is be able to tell stories, like bring in different interviews that I've done and clips from different interviews and have a narrative that might be a little easier to follow instead of having to watch every interview that's like 60 minutes. Still have the interview out there, but put in like a bit of a narrative kind of episode, but do it in a fashion that's quick so that I'm not spending 6 months on it. I'm spending a week just taking interviews and being like, okay, clips from the interviews and be like, this is what we need to say to get people to comment.
Totally.
Right. And I think
Totally.
I feel like that's where, but I really like the fact where you're just like, you can do documentaries and help out the communities you're telling the stories for by quickening the process of getting stuff done, such as water testing, such as whatever that might be, to be able to make sure that, hey, we think something's happening here. All right, well, let's figure that out. Let's test that. There's a lot of labs around that will test this stuff like before anybody else gets their hands on it. And we can do that and do it at a much faster process. Here's a question for you, from me as someone who wants to do this and always looking for funding to do this kind of stuff. Like, who are without saying the people, who are the types of people that are willing to fund projects like this? Because it has to be fast acting. Like when something does come up, it has to be fast acting. It has to be something where you're saying, hey, look, like if you guys want to be a part of this, this is what we're going to say. Or I've had connection with you in the past. You might be interested in this project. Like, what are they just like sort of typical Hollywood funders for this type of content? Or is it like small organizations, small businesses that are like, I want to be a part of this? I'm just curious of like where that funding comes from.
Yeah, well, luckily not everybody are the Koch brothers and the Heritage Foundation,
Right.
there are some very good philanthropists in the world that are aware of science and the validity of science and believe in the climate crisis and want to put their money in that. And so we're a nonprofit. There are a lot of private foundations that fund us that really want to be talking about this. A good example is like the Rockefeller kids, like their family basically created the modern oil industry. And they don't believe it at all. It's kind of, it's inspirational. It's like they're big climate activists and they're working to dismantle that. And that's just one of many, many, many. Bloomberg is another classic good billionaire, if you can believe those exist, who are on the right side of history and who are actually like giving their money with the awareness that a lot of their money came from colonization and arguably racist practices that created the current climate catastrophe.
Absolutely.
So they exist is what I'll say. And Hollywood sometimes too. Like we're partnered with Adam McKay, who did Don't Look Up, and
such a good.
I've
never connected with a movie more as a scientist than that.
Meryl Streep as the president, I was dying.
Oh my God. Hilarious. But when people ask me like, why'd you love that movie so much? I'm like, I live it every single day. Like, what do you mean? When I talk about climate change and you guys talk about football or you talk about something else because you don't want to think about it, that's what we're talking about. This is what we live with every day. It's just not an asteroid coming to hit us. It's what we're doing already. It's so interesting.
I don't know
Yeah.
if you ever heard that little story about how the guy who coined climate change, he was actually like an ad guy who the fossil fuel industry hired to find a term that sounded very mild. Oh,
Oh,
it's just
interesting.
climate. It's just
Yeah.
change. Everything changes. And that same man was living in the Hollywood Hills when it caught fire and he had to evacuate his house. And then he suddenly avowed that he was going to help the climate movement because
I didn't
that same
realize.
ad exec who created that for the right was basically like horrified at what he had done.
Yeah, can you imagine? Like, yeah, I never knew that story. I didn't know that because I mean, I knew it was global warming was the one that everybody's like, oh my gosh, like the world's warming, like, and then but they used it eventually to fight against it, be like, well, it's not warming in every place. I remember all that kind of stuff, and then climate change came.
Right.
It's like, no, just you can refer to it as I always say, you can refer to it as whatever you want. We're in trouble. Shit's hitting the fan. We're in trouble. We need to help, and we need all help,
Yes.
all hands on deck.
Yes, exactly.
One of the things that is very curious to me about your work, your ability to hit different audiences. We talked a little bit about it before. You mentioned though your focus right now, and I don't know if it was always, but your focus definitely right now is on like sort of like BIPOC audiences and really focusing on BIPOC communities. I guess one thing is why, and then the other question, the follow up is how do you focus some of those content pieces or all the content pieces to attract or hit the heartstrings to get people to really be aware and understand.
So, so I've prioritized working with BIPOC and frontline organizers and activists, mostly because I'm so grateful that we have a group of, in terms of indigenous, a group of people that already live in right relations with the earth and have done so historically for time immemorial.
Mm-hmm.
Um, like if we had to start at scratch with our, colonizer, extractive, top
Yeah.
down, humans are the best
Oh yeah.
approach, and we didn't
Yeah.
have anybody who had any sort of relation to oceans and
Oh my
living
gosh.
ecosystems, I would just be so much more upset at life. The fact that we have groups, and I've had the honor of working with the Anishinaabe, the Navajo, the Hopi, the Gwich'in in Alaska. I've worked with indigenous Hawaiians that invited me to the mostly indigenous island of Molokai and even took me to their sacred beach,
Wow.
but said, stick close by because you'll get beat up if you go to the bathroom by yourself.
Okay.
I'm like, don't I look Hawaiian enough? And they're like, no, you will get beat
No.
up. um, so for me, indigenous storytelling gives me hope.
Gotcha.
Um, Black storytelling is, and frontline storytelling, where the people are like at the front lines of pollution, is a very awful, dirty narrative. I've
Mm-hmm.
worked a lot in Cancer Alley. I'm working in Houston this year with the petrochem build out there.
Mm-hmm.
They've picked historically Black and brown communities because they think people can't fight back there, and then they treat people as disposable with products that they have to dispose of somewhere, even though they cause cancer, and even though they're lying about the amount of the emissions that they're self-reporting to the EPA. They're like,
Right.
let's put it somewhere. Why not put it in Black and brown neighborhoods? And so I think, telling the stories of the people who are hit first and hardest and
Mm-hmm.
who also may not have the generational wealth to be able to rebound, I think that already imbues an urgency into the story, right? That
Right.
already ticks one of my boxes as a storyteller of like,
For
what
sure.
are the high stakes? What's the urgency? I could lose my house if a
Yeah.
hurricane hits. You know what I mean? Like, I don't have a second or third house to go to. Like, this is it. This is the house I inherited that my parents, 40 acres and a mule, freaking inherited, at
Mm-hmm.
the hard work and hard labor of relatives. So, but the audiences is a slightly different conversation. Like nowadays, you can do organic reach with social, or you could do like targeted reach. You can target whoever you want with social media, and it's really interesting because you can look at like values systems. There's an organization called Harmony Labs that did this really good
Heard of them.
like
Yeah.
narrative breakdown of like who are the climate audiences, and it was broken down into value systems. So we don't just work with frontline and BIPOC. We did a whole campaign with the Department of Energy where
Okay.
we were basically trying to rebrand renewable energy for purple states before the election, of
Hmm.
basically how like power doesn't have to be like solar and renewables don't have to be looked at as like pansy, like
Yeah.
that this could be like a distinctly American proud moment that we like kind of what China is doing now. Like this could
Yeah.
be a moment, it's like, it could be masculine. It could be all of the things that appeal to a different value system that maybe purple states or red states are more into.
Hmm. Hmm.
So I think there are ways of like hacking the algorithm if you figure out like, okay, well, what base are we targeting? And then how do we do that? And then we also track all of our like who watches, how long they watch. I hate to break it to you, but like most people tap out after 15 seconds for a lot of videos. So you're lucky if you get, that's why you got to do cold opens, Andrew.
Yeah, the hooks.
Like
It's the hooks.
when you were talking about putting together all your videos, I kept thinking start in the middle, like in medias res,
Yeah.
start with the problem.
Yeah.
What's the problem in the interview and then go from there.
Yeah, like almost a clip right of the interview of like the worst part, and you're like, all right, or the best part, but the worst what they're saying. Yeah, to get people.
Yeah, but with style,
Of
not
course.
just like yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I find if you have a emotionally vulnerable character that's facing a really great villain, there's no shortage of really great villains in this fight, unfortunately. Then you can appeal to a really wide array of people if if you stick to certain like storytelling principles that are just tried and true. I mean, Hollywood has known this for decades of how to do
Yeah.
this, and so it's nice to be able to apply it to groups on the ground that don't have that infrastructure and need it.
Absolutely. To tell their story, if you're telling the story of a black and brown community that's facing adversity because of the climate crisis, is your audience the same, like a black and brown audience of other people who would connect with them a little bit more, or is it a little bit of a wider variety of people who want to fight for and to help other people that might look like me? How do you decipher what that is, or do you just do like different types of content and then put it out to different audiences?
That's a really good question. When I was working in unscripted TV for a network, they would usually decide who they were targeting.
Gotcha.
With our new algorithm that we're trying to do, that we are doing, it's more about what does the community want? Like who is their target? And so I would argue, let's take the example again of Sharon Levine and
Yep.
Cancer Alley. And Sharon Levine, the short story is that Formosa Plastics wanted to build a giant plant in her neighborhood, which would have tripled the air pollution, which is already called Cancer
Bad.
Alley for a reason. It's got like 150 petrochemical plants on this one swath of the Mississippi River, which is all former plantation land. It was sugarcane slave plantations. And there are still bodies on these sites that they haven't exhumed, and they don't treat them as heritage sites. So I asked Sharon, what do you want? What do you want with this story? Like, what do everybody's telling your story, but what do you want? Because we're going to gift you this content. What do you want to do with it? And she was like, well, I'd really like to have a talk with the president of the parish, because we've never actually met face to face. And I was like, I want to film that. And we basically got some great footage where he was like, this is not Cancer Alley. He denied the name, didn't believe the name. And she was like, and she rightfully so starts arguing back with him. Sharon is fiery. And she was like, this is Cancer Alley. This is Cancer Alley. So then that was one thing she wanted. And she also wanted to have a conversation with her parish representative who had voted yes to Formosa Plastics coming in, despite what the people wanted in his parish. So I arranged a meeting where we're filming with this man who I beg you to watch it because it is the most bizarre thing I've ever filmed. But he basically kind of just started citing that God was pleased with what he had done, and he got his recommendations from God, and God was pleased. And then he gets into an argument with everybody in the room because they're like, this is not about the kingdom of God. This is about St. James Parish. You're our representative. And so it's a very antagonistic scene.
Of course.
And then everybody afterwards asked me, and I've had like documentarians want to license this footage like on repeat. And they're like, how did you get the conflict? And I'm like, well, she wanted this. And I knew it was going to be a conflict. So I set it up knowing that this was a contentious situation, but it was the next step for her to win her campaign. She wanted to get this guy kicked out. And so because of our piece, he was kicked out as
Pretty quickly, I would
her
imagine.
representative.
Yeah.
And the funniest moment that I didn't get to film of that whole scenario was I called Sharon in the car with my AP. She was in a separate car driving away from that crazy situation. And I said to Sharon, well, I think you might need a new representative. And she was like, well, what I need is a new AC repairman because it turns out he was also her AC repairman.
Small parish, I guess. Yeah.
I laughed so hard. Oh,
But
Lord.
this is, this is surprising to me. I almost feel like it's very there's definitely a parallel with science and conservation to this. It's almost like ethical filmmaking. You're coming into a community, and like you said, you're asking questions, and so you ask this wonderful woman. You're saying, "What do you want? I want to meet our representative because I've never met this person before." Okay. If you meet them, do you mind if we film? No, that's fine. You film it, you get the content you need, but also she gets, whether it's a conflict or not, she gets the next step of what her process is to help the community out. It's not I'm going to come in, I'm just going to film, I'm going to put you two together without telling you, and then hopefully there's a conflict that I can get juicy stuff out. It's I'm helping you get to your next step, and then with that is you're allowing me to film that whole process and hopefully bring about more awareness to that, but you're doing it with her permission and everything, and saying, hey, if you help me out, for sure, that sounds great. It's very similar to the way conservation has moved, where, we used to have parachute signs. You kind of mentioned it in filmmaking, where you go in, you get what you want, you get out, you don't help the community, you're just trying to get the story. Same thing with parachute science, is your scientist goes into for all intents and purposes, a coastal community, say a fishing village, and you go in and you do all your studies and everything, but you don't share the information with them. You probably use their boats, you use the people, you don't talk to them, and you don't, you may make nice with them, but you don't share the information. And they're probably like, well, we want to know, like, we don't have this capability and stuff. And so that we call that parachute
That's why
science.
we set you up with the airplanes and the boats.
Exactly,
We
right?
wanna help,
And they're always friendly, always willing to help, for the most part anyway. They're always willing to help. And so now conservation has moved towards, there's a great organization called RARE.
I know RARE, yeah.
Yeah, where they do the Fishing Forever program, where they'll move into a village. They'll come to a village if they're invited. They'll come to a village and they're like, what do you need? Like, what are your problems facing the ocean? And then they look at, is there a way we can support in getting? And sometimes it's as simple as, and I say simple in terms of, you don't have to do crazy experiments. As simple as like, hey, we're fishers. We just want to be recognized as a professional designation, like an engineer. Because if we're recognized as a professional designation, the regional government will take us more seriously, and they'll start to track how much fish we start to take and how much money that brings in. And then we get more recognized for that and valued for what we bring in. It's not necessarily conservation focus where you're trying to make sure tracking how much fish they take or anything, but it ends up being that they track more fish, but it's helping out the community. So it's like a bit more, it's more ethical than coming in, going out, way more ethical. And you're helping it out, but you're also getting what you need and saying, we want this community to be better for the ocean. They're doing that. Same with you. You want this woman to be able to get to the next step. I really love this idea. I'm going to ask this question. I think I know the answer. This is not done normally in Hollywood, where you're trying to, this is like a sector, like a branch of the way documentaries are being done. Correct? Is that my unfortunate crazy answer?
No, unfortunately it's not. I think my worst story to that effect was I was filming a TV episode in Minneapolis about, each episode was around the country about different problems that Black communities face across America. And this episode was pre-George Floyd, and it was about police brutality. And I was interviewing Jamar Clark's mom, his birth mom. And I don't know if you remember, but Jamar Clark was the young man who was on the ground, handcuffed with his hands behind his back and shot by a cop while he was handcuffed on the ground. It was bad.
Yeah, it's disgusting.
And, she had an eye patch over one of her eyes. And it was just because she was missing an eye or something had gone wrong. And I had worked to set up this connection with her because I knew she was going to have to talk about the hardest thing she'd ever have to talk about,
Of
which was the
course.
loss of her son in such a brutal, violent way.
Hmm.
But the network was there, and they were like in the ear of one of the other producers. And I had gotten her to the place where she was just like really in it with me and
Hmm.
trusting me,
Of
and
course.
knew that I was a woman of color and I was on her side regardless of the fact that I was a producer.
Hmm.
And then I hear the other producer, like, he like kind of tugs at me and he says, "Hey Maya, network is asking, can you ask her to take off the eye patch? Because we can't
Jesus.
we can't really see her face. Can you ask her to take it off?" And I was like, "No, I don't
Yeah.
want to do that." And then they pushed back, and network was in the other room like listening, and they pushed back on me, and I really like adamantly was like, "I do not want to do that. I do it's gonna." And then
It's her
they fought
pride.
me on it. So they made me take off her iPad, ask her to take off her iPad. She went into another room. She was so embarrassed,
Of course.
so embarrassed. After that, she had to redo her hair so that it covered her face.
It's like her biggest vulnerability, other than like talking about something that is awful.
Exactly.
And
Exactly.
and yeah. Ugh.
And then I had a conversation with the producer who was on my side, but he kind of had his hands tied. And then I got chastised by the network for it, and they were like, "You shouldn't ever like counter what we're asking for." And I was like, "I'm the person that knew this community. I'm the person who has been working to build relationships with them for the last 6 months. You should be asking me what I think about, like, and we should be asking her. Like,
Yeah.
we didn't default at all to her." And that's just one of like so many stories I could tell you of people like not trusting that the community knows what they need, or being
Hmm.
extractive. I
Yeah.
mean, or just holding the licensing and not giving the footage. It's a really rough and tumble industry. But the reason people do it is because you could win an Oscar with the piece, and then everybody knows your name. Everybody, you get
Yeah.
instant fame.
It's
So
that one
that's
shot. They want that one shot.
that's the
We're in a
trade-off.
very different society now from a content perspective. The faster the content, the better. I mean, we're in such a fast-paced world. The stories matter. You could argue that you don't need as much production in a way like that. I see from my, like, I can get a lot of content out now. I'm not getting millions of views by any means. There are some people who will create content where it's just them talking, and on TikTok or on Instagram, and they are talking about very relevant issues. There's actually a guy I watch who's been working in the oil and gas sector for a long time, and he explains the markets in a very easy fashion that I can understand. And he talks a lot about, some like everything that's going on in Venezuela and everything that's going on in the world, and how, like, some people who are expecting certain things to happen probably won't happen, because he has a very good understanding of the history and the whole world market. So it makes it, but he just talks out of his car or wherever he is, out of his home. And I feel like there's such a fast pace, but it's almost like a bit of a pressure to get content out very quickly.
Hmm.
I was watching a few of the videos today, a few, like 50 or 60 of these short piece contents
Oh, wow.
that you had, because they're very interesting to me, and I want to kind of look at, and I love the style that you did. You guys have been able to, as a team, put out a lot of content. Is it like, how, like, what's the process there? Like, are
Mm.
you looking to hit like a piece of content a day? Because they're very well researched, very well edited. The storytelling's there. That's
Hmm.
not done in an hour or less than an
Mm.
hour or in a couple of hours. Like, what's the shoot? Like, what's the goal in terms of pieces of content a day? And then how long does it take for those pieces of content to be made? I'm just curious from a content creator's perspective.
Yeah, so we're very clear that we can't be at a news type pace.
Right.
Documentary isn't news. It's
Right.
a deeper look at the thing that made the news.
Gotcha.
So news can fly in, fly out, and they have a deadline.
Hmm.
We will try to find a deadline with whatever community or what the funder wants, and usually the funder will have some idea of deadline. But we're more at a fast-paced, very short doc schedule.
Yeah.
So I'll have about maybe 2 to 3 weeks of research and reaching out to characters and building relationships and building logistics, finding the crew, hiring an assistant, associate producer. And then our shoots are a little more refined in the sense that I try to, and I learned this from like unscripted TV, you try to stack as many of the events that are happening in a community in the shortest amount of time,
Gotcha.
So like, and that's hard because sometimes there's a hearing for this, site fight, and then a month later there'll be a hearing for something. So maybe you don't get both hearings, maybe you get what you need out of the one hearing, and then you also have a scene with somebody or a walk and talk or so I usually start my shoot with the sit down interviews, because then you know what you're going to get for the B-roll. You know what you need to tell to fill in the story. So, if somebody's talking about the rights of nature in relation to ocean, like legal framework of oceans, then you want to get some lawyers like figuring out something with rights of nature, or like earth justice lawyer in a courtroom, and so then our shoots will be like a week, probably like a week max. I'll bring a crew of like 4 to 6 people. We always have a sound mixer, like I said, because you can't
so important.
cheat bad audio. Yeah.
Yeah.
I try to hire local as much as I can in the community, but usually we'll fly in like some pros that we just have a flow with, and we know that they do like really high quality work.
Gotcha.
And then we have a suite of editors. I think at this point we have 5.
Wow.
1, 2, 3, 4. I think we have like 4 or 5 editors and GFX artists that are on staff. So this part is probably the most time consuming, because we'll start with a paper cut from transcripts. So we do like kind of the 60 minutes version of where we get the transcripts. Usually in unscripted TV, you're actually doing like string outs in Avid or Premiere. And so you're cutting from a string out, but paper cuts are good because then you can kind of like see what facts you're missing to tell the picture. And our goal this whole time, our goal is to simplify this as much as possible for a wider audience to understand it. So you don't have to be a climate wonk,
of course,
or climate policy nerd, or even a marine biologist to understand what in the hell the jellyfish are doing, right?
Yes.
So we do the paper cut, then I create a rough cut with my editors, and then we go back and forth like a bunch of different cuts, like what piece are we missing? Oh, that doesn't make sense if we don't have that, and luckily we have a writer's room process that's like very democratic. So everybody in our company weighs in, even interns. Yeah. And I like when interns are in the room, because I'll be like, all right, raise your hand when you start losing focus and attention. And so they'll just be like, and I'm like, okay, that's where we lose steam. We need something else happening here because we lost the interns.
Yeah.
And then, and you have to kill your babies. Like, that's the moment where I'm like, oh, but I really want the earth justice lawyer expounding on the rights of this. And the team's like, it's not, no, just lose that part. So, and then we finally get to like a final, So in the rough cut, I'm talking to community. We'll send a cut to them and say, how is this looking? What are you thinking? What are your thoughts, to kind of have a collaboration there? We don't want any surprises on the end where people are like, oh, why did you put me? And I've had people call me and say, so I like what you've done. This one sentence, we are going to get vilified by the fossil fuel industry for this sentence. Can you take this out? And we'll take it out. Yep. And it's like, we don't want to do harm. Right.
Right. Of course.
And then we usually start with the YouTube cut because it's a longer form. And then from there, and by long form, I mean like 8 to 15 minutes, which is long on the internet. And then we'll cut down for different social platforms and use the algorithm of what those platforms like, so like what kind of editing does it have to be square format? Is it vertical is not my favorite, but
Yeah,
it
I
is
hear
what
you.
it is.
Because you can't get the full breadth of it. And
it's like, why would we want to see this tiny little sliver when I could see the whole landscape? But you know what it is.
I Totally get it. I've actually seen some situations where in vertical, and I don't know how they do this, it shifts.
Switch it.
Well, no,
Oh,
not
yeah,
just
yeah.
the length, but like from a vertical perspective, it almost just like it pans over, and you
Mm.
see and it kind of goes back and forth, and you kind of see it. It's really interesting. I don't know how they do it. I've always tried to, like someone who's dabbling in editing, I'm like, how does one do that? I'm like, that's
Yeah, I know what
interesting.
you're talking about. I don't think we've done it recently, but I think we have
Yeah.
done it. I could ask for you.
Yeah, for sure. No biggie. I'm always interested. So just as we kind of end this off, there's so much content. Before I asked the last question, like, love to have you back on because I feel like this is such a productive interview, and I know you're busy, but
Oh, I've
whenever you
loved
have the
it.
time, please let me know because I'd love to have you back on and talk more about this. But I guess like for now, things are kind of crazy in the world. People are worried about a lot of things. And it seems like the environment, people are worried about it, but it's almost taken a bit of I guess it's kind of like, you look at people in a place like Cancer Alley. They're more worried
Mhm.
about like getting sick chronically than worried about the climate crisis, right? And so, yes, they're worried about the climate crisis, but they have to worry about survivability first. There are a lot of
Mhm.
people now with everything going on in the world, especially in the U.S. There's a lot of new stuff that's been happening over the last year. Immigration policies and affordability and medical bills and all this stuff seems to be dominating. How do you as content creators try and I guess you're almost competing with that attention or try and keep environment at the same level or close to the level to keep people aware and try and inspire action?
God, that's a hard question.
Right.
I
I guess it's more
mean,
of like, how do I help? Like, how do I do this?
yeah, I mean, the US military called climate a threat multiplier. And so
Yes.
it really multiplies the impact of whatever is already going on. So, the people that are having health risks because of the pollution from benzene or
Hmm.
chloroprene that's being spewed in Cancer Alley, that's only going to get worse.
Hmm.
Like
Yeah.
it's unless we do something, it's like the ocean acidification, the ocean taking on the bulk of the greenhouse gas warming. What is
Hmm.
it, like over 90%?
At least, yeah.
Of the heat that is
Yeah.
it's acting as a carbon sink, like
Hmm.
all of that. These are threat multipliers, and it's also so exponentially expensive to not
Hmm.
do something
Yeah.
that a good example is during the pandemic. We really couldn't talk about the climate crisis during the pandemic. We had to shift to kind of parallel storytelling,
Oh,
but
interesting. Okay.
we still kind of had things in the works that were um, looking at the climate lens, but pairing it with the pandemic, right? So it was like we were looking at how companies were getting bailed out, and then
Hmm.
we'd use like a metaphor of like how this has happened with the fossil fuel industry subsidies,
Right.
right? So
Right.
we kind of would like bake into the cake in a time where everybody was focused on Renee Good or
Hmm.
ICE or COVID or what have
Right.
you. I'm also a part of the Hollywood Climate Summit. I'm
Okay.
like on their advisory board, and they are baking into the cake on like fictional TV shows
I saw that. I heard that.
climate.
Yeah.
So like Abbott Elementary, it's not
Yes.
about climate, but
No.
Quinta Brunson will be like, "Why is our AC out? It's hotter than it's ever been. What is happening?" And Quinta, rightfully so, she'll talk about how she wanted to create a show that her mom would want to talk about climate when her mom has no knowledge of climate. And so her mom could connect to a teacher who doesn't have AC in a classroom with kids on the hottest day of the year in the
Yes.
school, and what a problem that is.
Yeah. Yeah.
So they're product placing climate in a very effective way. And the Hollywood Climate Summit basically like brings all the people who care about climate in Hollywood together once a year to figure those out. But I mean, it's by far an imperfect science. We are
Of
still
course.
trying to figure out like how the best ways
Yeah.
to do this when all eyes are focused on something else, and where climate always gets kind of shoved under the bed or
Yeah.
put on the back burner for later. And we just have done that for 60 years now, you know.
Well, 100%. But I do think that's a really good strategy where we bake it into stories that are already being told, but just sort of in the, maybe not the main story, but as difficultly where people can understand, wow, man, it's really hot, or maybe they're talking about, oh yeah, well, I just got the new house rebuilt because, you remember the fires back in the, when we lost the house in the fire. Oh yeah, I remember that. Like, and talk
Right.
a little bit, you can have that as a little bit of a understory to the main story. I think that's
Yeah.
very
Oh,
key.
and where we're having success with it is we have a coalition we're working with right now of a bunch of different partners, including one advertising company, that we want to hack the narrative when a fossil fueled climate disaster happens, like the LA wildfires or Hurricane Melissa hitting Jamaica. Right
Right.
now, the news is always talking about poor land management or
Yes.
like who messed up, and they
Yes.
never talk about
Yes.
climate. And
No.
our coalition, we had climate scientists telling us that hurricane, it was almost a Cat 6. It
Yeah.
was like
They had to make it almost a
outside of
new
the,
category. Yeah.
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 And so why on earth would we not connect that to climate? So we're working to create like fast made social content that can do that, that can like respond to these disasters and like bake that into the atmosphere of everybody focused on something, you know?
Amazing. I think
Like
that's so
even the
important.
like I
So
had to
important.
evacuate my home in LA. I lived in Topanga
Oh, I'm
Canyon. I had
so
to
sorry.
evacuate multiple times, and all the firemen kept saying, "Oh yeah, this place is going to be the next to burn." And I was like, it's so
It's
terrifying.
horrible. I had I guess an online friend that lost her house in the fire. Luckily, she was privileged enough to have some place to go, and nothing happened. But just watching, the fact that she had to leave her cats behind and trying to go back and get her cat, like the stories of that. As as someone, you're a cat owner, I'm a dog
I'm
owner, like a
like,
pet
cover
owner,
your
and
ears, guys, cover your
yeah,
ears.
yeah, and but you
Oh
don't.
no.
That really made me think of how quickly people had to leave their pets. It's like, as you know, as a pet owner, you're like, no, let's grab the dogs, grab the cats, let's go. But it's that fast, and you're just hoping
Oh,
for the
it's
best when you
terrifying.
get back. And obviously,
Yeah,
people did not get the best news when they got back, and
yeah.
so forth. And so, yeah, like I do agree. Like content has to be done quickly and has to be, and I feel like there are more people who are coming out as individuals, especially in the ocean space, to do this kind of
Mm.
content create, and we're starting to organize, as I mentioned
Hmm.
before, and I really like that idea. I feel like there needs to be more funding around supporting the people around that as a collective to be able to get those stories out and become
Hmm.
like even better creators and better storytellers to help that. In the ocean space, I just don't know if that infrastructure is there yet. I feel like
Right.
the Years Project is doing a great job with climate. I feel like the ocean space needs a little bit more of that concentration, because a lot of times oceans and climate, they merge, but they don't get talked a lot about. You mentioned the ocean acidification and sea surface temperatures and things like that, but it doesn't get the same. Like you go to Climate Week in NYC or you go in Toronto here, and it's you may have one session on it, and it's like this
Right.
should be paired together, and it should be. Obviously I'm biased because I'm a marine biologist, but like you're just like, we need to talk about this more.
Yeah, well, I totally agree, and I think there's a big gap in the storytelling around oceans that
Mm-hmm.
I would love to tackle in the future. And
Yeah,
there are a few gaps, and I'd love to just, I'm sure it's like probably a different episode, but if I can just quickly say what I think the gaps are and hope people
absolutely.
run with
Please
it.
do. Yeah, yeah.
Um, there's a lot of like, rightfully so, animal focus, and I love a good whale and a dolphin.
Oh yeah.
But I think like focusing on co-producing of ocean management with the indigenous is really interesting. That's a
Mm-hmm.
really interesting story, and how indigenous have been successfully fighting back for like treaty rights with
Mm-hmm.
like the High Seas Treaty and like
Mm-hmm.
ocean management. That is a story that's not being told.
No.
Um, the like fighting to protect natural systems like mangroves, I know that you've talked about in the
Yep.
past,
Yep.
and like them being used as a carbon sink in and that's
Yep.
a nice positive story, like the communities that are actually seeing the before and after of a place that would get hit by a hurricane, and then what happens
Mm-hmm.
if it gets hit this time but they have a restoration project. Like
Yep.
that's, human centric. It's not about a dolphin, and it's like,
No.
okay, we haven't really told that story. And then like global shipping is an interesting angle to me because it's like, oh, if you Google bunker fuel, you will be like, what are we doing as a species? Like what these massive ships use is like the sludge that is left over from the refining process of oil and gas. It is this thick sludge, and it has, I mean, not only is it like crazy greenhouse gas emissions, but it's also particulate matter gets released. So they're polluting the air as well as the ocean that they're traveling on. And there's solutions, like they're working on treaties right now so that they're going to phase out like to those emissions to, and then all the ships above like 5,000 tons will have to be net zero by 2027.
Yeah. Yeah. There's a lot of work being done on that. Yeah. Yeah. Definitely stories that need to be talked about. Yeah.
Yeah. I think those are all really interesting. Oh, and rights of nature.
Yes.
You know, like all of the fights, you know, Ecuador, Panama, India. I would love to see a rights of nature story and like legal fights around the ocean and waterways. Yeah. And I mean, like the potential collapse of AMUC, the circulatory system in the Atlantic.
Don't you want to think about that?
Not only keeps me up at night, but it's also like, how did The Day After Tomorrow get that right in like 2003? And we all laughed about that movie with Jake Gyllenhaal. Yeah. And now we're like, what, 20 years later? Yeah. And like, I would do a story about that in a heartbeat.
Oh, yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah. No, there's so many stories that need to be told. And I think especially from an ocean perspective or about the ocean and coastal communities, like good and bad, of course. And there's a lot of conflict. There's a lot of overcoming. And I think it would be great to see to be covered. So yeah, maybe we can talk about that afterwards and we can see how we can get those stories told. I've got a lot of connections within that area. Yeah, no, this has been wonderful. I think you and I could speak for about 3 to 4 hours and make a great episode, but it's already been fantastic. I don't want to hold you up any longer. I want to thank you so much, not only for the work you do, but coming on here and telling us about it. I am very, very inspired by the videos you guys produce, by what the work that you've done, the passion that you have, and I think my audience will be very inspired as well as a community. So I want to thank you so much. We're going to put all the links that you provided me very nicely beforehand so that people can get a hold of you. And again, thank you so much for being on this episode of the How to Protect the Ocean.
Thank you so much. And we didn't touch on it, but go see Sinners.
Yes, that's right.
Some awards this season. It's a magnificent film.
Unbelievable. I think they already got the Critics Award.
I didn't see it.
I mean,
not a Golden Globe.
I heard they're up for some nominations. I did it again.
It's not a climate story, but it is a really interesting racial story.
Yes, which can have some ties to a lot of climate stories. Yes.
Yeah.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Maya. I really appreciate you being on the show.
Thanks, Andrew. Bye.
Thank you, Maya, for joining us on today's episode of the How to Protect the Ocean podcast. It was so great to have you. I love the way you do documentaries. I think it is the way of the future in terms of ethical documentary making. Just like I said at the beginning of this episode, where we talked about how we're moving away from parachute science, which is basically a scientist or a team of scientists coming into an area, local area, study science, use their boats, use their people, but not share any of the work with them to find out to share their findings and what that means for their local community. We saw a lot of that in the past. Hopefully that's being less and less and less as we go through. Haven't been in the field in a long time, but there are a lot of people working against that and trying to make sure that it's more collaborative or even supportive work. Just like I mentioned in the interview, an organization like Rare in their Fish Forever program, where they work with villages, fishing villages across the tropics to ensure that not only do they understand their area and they can support that understanding, but support them in their fisheries and also support communication across villages across the equator, which is absolutely phenomenal. So if you haven't checked that out, you can check out Rare either through this podcast, if you search it up, or you can just go to their website. It's wonderful. But Maya's work is very similar to this, where she, as she mentioned, she works with people in a community and be like, how can I help you? Like, if we do a documentary on this story, how can we help you advance this story or advance the work that you're doing and be able to connect the right people, get the meeting set, and then film the interaction that happens to be able to get a great documentary and see how people work and see how things can develop And I think that's really great because you're not just coming out there to exploit people for a story. You're coming out there working with them, teaming up with them to put them in the right places for the right decisions or right actions to be made. And whether it moves in a positive direction or in a negative direction, you're helping the local community see something that happens, right? Just as when she talked about a documentary in Cancer Alley. I think it's wonderful. We're going to put a bunch of links to connect with Maya as well as the Years Project. It's such an important way to do documentary filmmaking in today's society. Short form videos, long form videos in terms of internet videos, and creating these documentaries quickly. Even if it's quickly, sometimes it seems like it takes a long time, but just on a regular basis and being able to be fun for that. I very much feel like we need this for the ocean, not just climate, and to get these ocean stories out there. So it's always wonderful to be able to do that. So I'll be talking with Maya behind the scenes, see if we can get that going at some point in time. But she is such a wonderful person, as you can see from that interview. Very collaborative, very interesting in terms of the filmmaking and her background. It was awesome to see. So thank you again, Maya, for joining us on today's episode of the How to Protect the Ocean podcast. And of course, I want to thank you guys for listening. If you have any comments or questions or anything related to this episode, let me know in the comments below if you're watching this on YouTube. And if you're listening to this through your favorite podcast app, like I normally do when I listen to podcasts, you can connect with me because I always find it frustrating. Like if I listen to an audio podcast and I want to, like I have something to say, there's no real place to go say it directly there. You can go to speakupforblue.com/feedback. You can leave a voicemail or you can just leave it in text. I will look at those comments and even answer back if I can, because I'm always interested in having a conversation. These are conversation starters, or even we continue like a bigger narrative, and then we continue the conversation with you who's listening to this. It's such an important part of what I feel like we need to do. And that's what I'd love to do, engage with you even more. So speakupforblue.com/feedback. I want to thank you so much for joining me on today's episode of the How to Protect the Ocean podcast. I am your host, Angela, from the True North Strong and Free. Have a great day. We'll talk to you next time, and happy conservation.